Welcome back to another episode of the Daily Flip podcast. I'm your host, Alex, and today we're going to be flipping through some of the top economic stories, including China's plans to halt sending key minerals that we use in everyday tech and military applications, a story about the Fed and what is coming with Donald Trump's plan, how Jerome Powell may adapt, and then an interesting story asking a question: should we boycott the U.S.? It's a little bit out there, it's a little bit crazy, but people on the left are asking it, so we are going to cover it. And of course, we're going to end today with our daily delight, a story meant to leave you feeling positive, ready to take on the day. Now, that's enough rambling for me. Let's jump in to our daily debate. So, if I was to tell you that we produce less than 10% of any key mineral, and that is a broad-ranging thing, whether it be copper, cobalt, gallium, so on and so forth. And that's a little rough. There are other minerals that we do produce, but at least when it comes to military technology, the evolving need for GPUs, CPUs, chips, everything like this, if I told you that we produce less than 10% in country for everything that we use, or we're less than 10% of the producers overall across the world, what does that make you feel? Does that give you a little bit of hesitation? Does that make you step back and say maybe we need to up that production? Because obviously we've been upping our production at least underneath the Trump era and even underneath the Obama eras, really since the 2000s. The natural gas that we're producing, we've actually increased oil, especially underneath Donald Trump. And then we saw the repercussions of that throughout the Biden term because he actually, most of the leases or the agreements that Trump had signed actually came to fruition underneath Joe Biden, but he started to shut those things down. And those are obviously very key components to any infrastructure that we're going to build out. We have to make sure that we can transport things, especially given that our system of transportation is mainly, semi trucks. So part of this key mineral and resource game we have down. There's no doubt about that. But when it comes to those advancing technologies, China has been on top of this for quite some time, especially because a lot of the raw materials are accessible in China. They're willing to open up their ability to mine it. They're not necessarily worried about environmental impact, but also because they have been the place where everything is produced. So they have the refineries because they get the raw materials from places like Indonesia, from India, and from the South American countries, Chile, Argentina, all these different places, and they're able to actually refine a lot of these goods in-house in China. So if they want to keep them, that's great. If they want to actually export them, make money from them, put them into products, they have the infrastructure, the industry in place. Regardless of whether they have the industry to actually refine all of these things, they still have a large amount that they are producing or mining from the earth. So when the U.S. is so far behind, it's dangerous, in my opinion. I want to hear your opinions. This is a long daily debate, but this is something that we don't talk about. We do sometimes, but then we get caught up in environmental issues, environmental regulations. We get caught up in questions about where our cobalt is coming from. Is it conflict cobalt? Is it gotten in unethical ways? All great questions. And one of the main solutions to that, rather than trying to fix issues in other countries, which, fair enough, we should not try to fund those places, how about instead of trying to fix that and send resources over there in order to stabilize the governments, to get these different criminal gangs out of the mining process in some of these countries in Africa, even in Central America, in some places on the more eastern side of Europe, other eastern nations over there in Asia. How about, or Australia even, there are some questionable ethics in Australia when it comes to mining. The point being, why don't we produce it at home? I understand that it's going to be more expensive, but why don't we actually invest in the future and bring in, whether it be a higher standard of cobalt that we're bringing onto the market, because if we're going to have better labor, it's going to be more expensive. We might as well have a better work product for it. Or why don't we start worrying about automation as well? I know a lot of people don't like when I bring up automation in order to replace jobs, because that's how it's normally framed. But at the end of the day, that's the way that we're going to have to do it if we want it to be cheap, because American citizens are expensive. The cost of living here is extremely expensive. Therefore, wages have to be high in order to keep up. But there are solutions, and we can actually deal with this. But let's get a little bit more of the context here. This article comes from the Free Beacon, and the headline reads, China is halting excuse me, China is halting critical mineral exports to the US, and Idaho Mine could help if it ever secures federal permits. So this isn't just about the fact that China is halting minerals. We're actually going to delve into what we can do about it and talk more broadly about the state of deregulation or the state of regulation. Underneath Donald Trump, he always talks about we need to peel back regulations. During his first term, he had a rule basically, which is if you're going to bring me a new regulation, bring two of them that I can peel back. This sort of mindset, while some would say it's dangerous, haphazardly getting rid of certain regulations in order to get new things through, haphazardly throwing the environment underneath the bus in order to reach your political ends, your economic ends, all of those things, fair enough, they're fair critiques, but when you have an example just like this, where there is a potential mine that is hamstrung, that has gone through multiple federal agencies in order to get permitted, just permitted, not to actually start mining, and they still haven't after 5+ years, okay, this is a question of whether or not we want to be independent. We want to be producing our own minerals. We want to be a self-sustaining nation. Now, no nation, especially as big as the United States, is truly self-sustaining nowadays. I'm not going to deny that. And to make the argument that we have to be fully self-sustaining is actually it's a pretty isolationist argument, but there's also the point here that I want to be involved in the free market. I think that we as a nation have to be involved in the free market. And in order to compete in the free market, we have to make innovations on our own end in order to get these minerals out of the ground, not necessarily just with human labor, but with other innovative techniques. We are one of the richest nations in the world. Maybe we can throw a little bit of investment behind this, or at least if the government's not going to step in and throw an investment, which is probably a good thing because you don't want these mines, these industries to be babied by the government and them not be able to make it themselves, ease the burden of actually getting operating, ease the burden of all these different administrative tasks that they have to do in order to start producing these products, and therefore take away the time time and money they have to spend with the lawyers and with these other bureaucrats, and actually allow that money to be redirected towards investment in the mine and new technologies that actually bring down the cost so it can compete in the free market. So you can see a synthesis of these two things. We need to be self-sustaining. We need to be able to use our own materials to meet our own needs, but also we need to allow the free market to be in place. We're not so isolationist that we're actually preventing other places from coming in, because it allows us to operate more efficiently, or at least it's a forcing mechanism to make sure that we are not overpricing everything, that we are just protecting our own industries that cannot survive without the government standing in the way. So there needs to be a strong mix here. And I think when we talk about removing those regulations, or at least trying to slim them down, this is a great example of something that China doesn't necessarily deal with as often. On the environmental front, they do pretend to care. They have signed multiple accords. They haven't seen their overall not exports, their carbon emissions fade in a massive way. Then again, there has been an argument that you don't see as much in cities because they're trying to restrict car driving. Fair enough. That's not going to be the large part of it. They've offset a lot of their energy production with coal. They're building new coal power plants on top of nuclear power plants on top of new dams. So they're taking the all-out approach. And then they're also mining in many places without necessarily environmental concerns, or at least without saying the project is dead if there are environmental concerns, or we will hamstring it. They are an economy that is geared towards, they are a government and an economy that is geared towards being a producer, being self-sustaining, but also essential to other places around the world. And they have positioned themselves ever so strategically. Good on them. Fair enough. We help prop them up. They have taken advantage of being brought back into the world economy, and they have found a system where they are basically at the center of it. They know their economic might, and they know the power they have. That's why when they say we're going to halt the export of certain minerals and materials, yes, of course we should be scared, and it should give us a kick in the butt. Is the change in this administration going to be enough? No. It has to be a comprehensive, long-term plan. Now, does that mean that we have to have government come in and fully subsidize certain industries that are strategic, quote unquote? No. I think We should do some subsidies, and I think when it comes to strategic industries, it gets very blurry. I think it's a dangerous line to say, oh, we'll give some subsidies here, some subsidies not. So I would prefer that we give very, very little, mostly grants that would possibly you have to apply for, rather than just straight tax credits. But the point being that we need to at least get them on the same playing field in the starting process. So what I mean by that is, if China opens a new mine today, let's hypothetically say it takes 1 year with all the paperwork that they have to do, because there are going to be some permit things, even if it's not about the environment, it'll still be about owning the land, owning the product, so on and so forth. So let's say it takes China 1 year to open a mine from the concept, the start of the concept. And in the United States, it takes 4 or 5. We need to at least be on the same playing field. We need to be at a 1 year start time, because then we can at least continue to grow our mining operations at the same rate that they could. Otherwise, we will just be trounced. So I think that is the first step to getting us on a competitive playing field. Now, if we are unable to match their prices, if we are unable to match even their quality, which would be interesting considering though they have one of the largest GDPs, gross domestic products, in the entire world, their GDP per capita is much lower than the United States. So in theory, and now let's be clear, GDP per capita doesn't necessarily determine what the quality of the product is going to be, but normally there is at least a correlation. It's not a causation there, but there is at least a correlation between the two. Hopefully we could create a superior product, at least one that doesn't have to be refined as long. Maybe it doesn't have to be transported as delicately because we make it stable by the time it comes out, or it's not as unstable. Whatever the chemistry may be, whatever the caveats may be, maybe we have a better product for that higher cost. So we need to enable ourselves to compete on that level rather than make it impossible to even compete from the very beginning. That's why we have to peel back regulations. So let's actually get into part of the story here from the article. Quote, Petra Resources, the developer of the Stingbite gold mine in the County of Valley in Idaho, first initiated studies, engineering, and community engagement on the project in 2010. Since then, it has faced mountains of permits filings and lengthy environmental reviews conducted by at least 5 separate federal agencies. Experts and legislators say the federal regulatory and permitting behemoth with which developers like Petra must contend is both costly and detrimental to American national security, and they have pointed to the project as an example of why they say Congress must take up permitting reform legislation as soon as possible. End quote. Now, are they the only example? No, there are plenty of other examples of long permitting processes. There are also plenty of other examples of quick permitting processes, especially when it's a industry that's getting a certain type of protection or it's getting a certain ease. So think of the chip production, and when it comes to these fabs that are going to take up a large amount of area, and it's actually an interesting one, they require a lot of water, and some of the fabs are being produced in areas that are low on water, and they have to actually worry about water permits and make sure that they're not sucking too much out of the ground, but they give a little bit of easements. The U.S. government has given a few different easements in order to allow these fabs, these different facilities, to actually continue to be made, and so that the product can come out of there with relative ease. So the government does very well step in and say, in certain instances, actually, no, this is good. We're going to be okay with this. We're going to let some of these environmental concerns fly. Because guess what? The water shelf in Nevada, Arizona, New Mexico, and this fab is being built in Arizona. In all of these areas, the water supply is a big issue. People are actually buying up the rights to water underneath the ground. There are companies that are doing it in order to conglomerate it. So this has been a concern, not just for the private property, the people that own land there and that have to deal with the water rights, but also for environmentalists concerned that there's not going to be enough water spread around there, that we might actually run into a desert area. And what I mean by that is a water desert. So not necessarily a physical desert, but the idea that it's really hard to get water in these areas, people may be left out. Those are things that fall underneath environmental concerns, especially as we see rising temperatures. That's something that they talk about a lot, like water deserts. The point being that they were able to ease, underneath the CHIPS Act, they were able to ease some of these concerns, ease some of these regulations in order to make it easier for these fabs to be built. So why can't there be a similar thing here. This is a strategic industry. If I have to use that argument in order to appeal to people, which I know appeals to the China hawks out there, especially the ones who see China as a big threat. I mean, if you're a China hawk, you see China as a big threat. But even the people that don't necessarily see it as a threat, but still understand that we are dealing with the next superpower. We are no longer the hegemon. We are probably headed towards, if not firmly in, a bipolar world. So to pretend as though we can just ignore them and we don't necessarily have to make changes in order to compete with them, not necessarily on a military front. If you want to prevent it on a military front, you want to actually make the competition on an economic front even more playful, even more advanced. Because if we're continuing to push each other forward, we may be a little hostile here and there, but we're actually making both of us better. If you want to make that argument in the free market, because guess what? In the free market, it doesn't have to be a zero-sum game. It doesn't have to be, this is an analogy that gets thrown around a lot nowadays. You don't have to be fighting for the same amount of pie. If you're both competing, you're both propelling yourself to be better, you're both actively becoming more efficient, and you are seeking new technologies, new innovative ways to approach things, these can actually grow the pie rather than having to make you have a survival mindset where you're cutting the pie up and you're not letting anybody else actually continue to push the boundaries. So this could be, in my opinion, a way to actually prevent a military sort of conflict, because you are actually providing a healthy outlet for the competition without necessarily trying to hamstring them completely and basically, knock them out of the knees, like we did with our restrictions on different chip materials and chip making materials going to China. When Biden had done that, I understood why he did it, for strategic reasons, but I had also literally the first day it happened, I questioned it on this podcast, which is, are we actually propelling them to build all this technology themselves, make them self-sustaining without having to use outside powers? Or is it smarter to actually allow them and basically force them to continue to use, not force them, the point being that we enable them to continue using outside technology that they have to get from other places in order to make these chips, so then they're still reliant on them. Some would argue that, well, if they're a really industrious nation, they will actually steal the technology and then make it themselves anyway, which is fair enough. But when you shut them off from that technology, they have no option but to create their own. And that may create a place where they are cut off to some degree from the international system. They are cut off from the economy in certain key ways, and they're able to build up that infrastructure themselves. They no longer have to fear the fact that we are going to do something if we go to war, because they are already self-sustaining. And if that last little bit made sense, you understand. If not, go listen to the podcast. I think it was somewhere around 140, if I'm not mistaken, but that is off the top of my head, so I could be very, very wrong on that one. But we've talked about the overall landscape with possible Trump coming in, getting rid of regulation, how we're facing down China. And I didn't necessarily talk about the broader U.S. economy. I was focused more on the regulation side. Now we want to have a conversation about the broader economy. China and the U.S. are both recovering from COVID. We seem to be doing better than China was, especially after some of the collapses of their large real estate companies early on, right before COVID, Evergreen, that sort of thing, or Evergrande. And then we can't also deny that they have had a resurgence or a pushback from their younger generations. So they're having a hard time of it, but not everything is smooth sailing for us either. So this article comes from the New York Times. Headline reads, "What to Watch as the Fed Makes Its Final 2024 Rate Decision." So Jerome Powell, our buddy Jerome Powell, who we have talked about plenty of times on this program, he and the Fed are meeting in Jackson Hole, Wyoming, as per always, and they're going to talk about whether they're going to keep the rates where they are, possibly raise rates in order to tamp down on inflation, or cut rates. I think right now they're probably considering keeping exactly where it is, because they are starting to see unemployment numbers pop up a little bit, and that's per the article. That's not just me saying, oh yeah, I go and research all of the graphs every single day. No, it's from the article. They talk about how unemployment is ticking up ever so slightly. So Jerome may be sitting there saying, guys, okay, we don't want this to get out of control. We don't want to have too much unemployment. We want to make sure that inflation continues to go down. We're about a point or a point and a half above our ideal goal. We're sitting somewhere around 3.5. They want it somewhere around 2. That's the idea. Now, the question that I really want to address, not just where the economy is now, I want to talk about the future of the economy. What does it look like underneath Donald Trump? And are they actually able to prepare for what is coming down the pipe? Quote, but all this could be complicated by economic policies coming out of the new Trump White House. Big tariffs or mass deportations could have both have the potential to stoke inflation and slow growth. Tax cuts and deregulation might speed up growth as well. But exactly what policies President-elect Donald Trump will try to pass, how the various policies are put into effect, and how companies in other countries might respond are all unknown, end quote. This is the scary part. And I say the scary part. It's not going to be the end of the world. Honestly, I think we will come out of this next 4 years pretty darn good. Now, if it takes a shock to the system, a proper recession, even though it's actually interesting, I want to take a step back to 2022 when Joe Biden was in office, and there was I believe it was 2021 going into 2022, but you remember when we had 2 consecutive quarters of GDP decline? It wasn't growth. And then the White House came out and said, oh, well, it's not actually a recession. Technically, the numbers don't match up right. The unemployment isn't at the right spot. And they said, okay, yeah, it is not a recession. They basically changed the definition, or they made it a more economic definition that scholars may use. But in the practical terms, everybody knows 2 quarters of decline in GDP is a recession. So they kind of skirted it. They said it wasn't actually a thing. And all of us are sitting here saying, well, no, it was actually a recession. But the White House was denying it. The U.S. Census has data on that economic growth throughout that time, and they actually have it properly labeled as a recession. And the reason I bring that up is because we had a recession right there in the middle, and yet the economy continued to grow afterwards. We had lots of new jobs. And again, a lot of them are federal jobs. A lot of them are regrowth jobs. So they were nice tall, analogy would be, they were nice tall plants. COVID cut them down a little bit, and now they're starting to sprout again, and they're growing back up. So they're not actually new jobs. They are rebound jobs. That's the way that they would describe it in the office itself. So the point being that we had a little bit of a recession then, and there was a little bit of a shock, but not really, because people were able to assuage the fears. They believed in the Joe Biden message at that point. So if we have something like that again, if we have a little bit of a shock, I think we can make it through. I think we can come out on the other side stronger. And I think, 1, it takes faith, but 2, it takes an understanding of the long game. If people have a system in which they fear a recession is coming, people are going to go, okay, so think about it this way. I've explained this before multiple times, but I'm going to make it simple. This is COVID times, okay? This is an analogy. This is COVID times. You know that tomorrow there is going to be a lockdown. What do? You go and buy all the essentials, right? Well, everybody else knows that there's going to be a lockdown tomorrow, so everybody else goes and buys the essentials. And then everybody gets hamstrung. Everybody's trying to buy toilet paper. Toilet paper is the big joke. Everybody's trying to buy toilet paper. Everybody's trying to buy food. Everybody's trying to buy all the things that they are going to need to be able to stay in their house locked down for a while. Well, think of the recession or the possible high inflation that comes along with it, because they have to raise interest rates, the high inflation that comes along with it because everybody's trying to buy, or inversely, the high interest rates that people are going to have to deal with, because that's coming, because that is our tactic for always dealing with high inflation. If you know that today the toilet paper is going to be $1, and tomorrow the toilet paper is going to be $2, you're going to go and sprint in order to get the toilet paper, and everybody else is going to do the exact same thing. That's what happens when a recession comes, when people see high prices, when they see the fact that their purchasing power is going to go down, that they may not have a job. Everybody wants to spend that money now in order to make the best use of it. And that causes these drastic spikes and fluctuations, not only in the stock market, but in real life costs and prices. So believing that there is a vision beyond the recession, believing in your leader, believing in the people that are running the Fed and the economic vision that they have, that can actually assuage some of the worst parts of the recession, because people aren't just saying, oh, I need to be able to survive now. I know things are going to be a little bit worse in 3 months, so I'm going to do everything I want now. But they're saying, okay, I know things are going to be worse in 3 months, but I believe that they are going to be better in 6 months. And that can actually assuage some of the fears. That's why all the talking points you heard from the Biden administration and from the Fed are soft landing, soft landing, soft landing. All these things reassuring that things could get better. Maybe they actually believe that, but at least it was smart on a practical level, because they are projecting confidence into the future. Hey, we know things aren't great now, but it's transitory. Hey, we know things really are tough for you and your family, and that inflation's not high. We are working on it, and we have a broader plan. We have a bigger vision, and you got to stick with us. So then people don't go out there and randomly spend. They're willing to invest. They're willing to save. They're actually taking money out of the economy, expecting that inflation won't actually strip that value away from them, because that's what inflation does. Inflation, every dollar that you leave in your bank account when there is inflation, that dollar has less purchasing power the next day, because all the prices on all those goods are going up. So you have to play a little bit of a mental game here too. And I think Jerome Powell is playing the right thing. And I think, honestly, there's enough confidence right after the election in Trump's ideal version of the economy that people will stick with it for 3, maybe 6 months. After that, I don't know. I think that Trump will do a lot of things that will actually unhamstring, that will deregulate, that will take the chains and the ropes off of any company who wants to succeed. But I also think that the tariff policy, which we're still unclear, though he says he want to do it, he also seems to be using it as, everybody believes he's using it as a negotiating tool. I think he and some of his people, aka J.D. Vance, and some of the new right, genuinely believe in a protectionist, high tariff sort of economy. And they have good theories behind it as well. I'm not trying to deny that. I'm not trying to take that away from them. But that does raise questions about where we are going to be going, and if people are going to be able to, or willing, more accurately, to put up with it. So that's an interesting one. And there's more to this article. They really describe the story of the mine, the regulation, but I really wanted to focus on the future here, and also how this pertains to a term underneath Donald Trump. So let's go to our last story. It will be a very quick one because it's from Counterpunch, and the headline reads, "Time to boycott the U.S.?" question mark. So it would be said something like, "Time to boycott the U.S.?" This author, and I am going to provide a very, very simple outline. This author is a leftist. This author does not like the aggressive position that Trump and Biden took on China. He does not like the immigration policy that the Democrats have decided to also co-opt. That is one of his main points. He doesn't just say that Trump has a terrible immigration policy. He says that Biden and the Democrats, in order to win in the election, have actually cowtailed. They have actually agreed, essentially, that the immigration issue is really prescient and that they need to actually do something about it, that they need to sit down and absorb the talking points of the other gentleman on the other side of the aisle, aka Donald Trump. And this is really making the author very, very angry. And that is fair enough. I understand when you've stood loyal to a party and they certainly don't stick to the talking points that they've used for the past few years, and they use the same language and then that the other side uses while they were still saying back 3 months ago that language is terrible, that they should not be saying that it's whatever racist, bigoted, homophobic, whatever whatever the word or descriptor they're using is. And then you turn around 3 months later, you were just deriding them, and now you're using it in order to win a political operation. That would be very frustrating. And to talk about the Middle East, how the Biden policy is better than the Trump policy, and Trump coming back in, he's not actually going to support the right nations. He's going to try to make it divisive. He's going to try to exile Iran. He's not going to get Hamas to the table. All these different things, they're all culminating. And he basically is coming up saying, okay, we've had a BDS movement in Israel. Something similar needs to to happen in the United States. I'm going to boycott the United States now. One, have fun with that, brother. Come on. It's not going to work. If you want to go to another country and live there, sure. Okay, there we go. You can try to strip as much money out of the U.S. economy as you want by getting your tax dollars out of there and getting your productive ability out of there, though, based on this article, it just feels like a long screed. Okay, maybe well written, not trying to hate on you personally. It was legible. I was able to go through it. Your thoughts were pretty obvious. But no offense, you and me both, actually. You and me both are not tech billionaires. You and me both are not adding anything revolutionary to the U.S. economy. I am commenting on it, and you are commenting on other things, okay? So if you want to boycott the United States, go to a different country, try to find products that have no parts that come from the United States, that have no supply chain, parts of the supply chain that were U.S. ships that were shipped along with other things. Like, try to find a way to boycott the United States. I'll be very happy for you. Go right ahead, bud. You live your life, but I think it's a little bit unrealistic. I understand what you're saying. I understand why you're frustrated. I also think boycotting the U.S. is the wrong way to go about it. Nobody's going to care about your boycott. Nobody's going to care about, even if 25% of the population boycotts, I'll be honest, nobody's going to care. Now, 25% of the population, if they leave versus boycotting actively within the country, that's a different thing. I don't think you're going to get that many people willing to stand up on this hill and die on it. But hey, that's enough. If you want to read this guy's article, all the different issues he's had, it is an interesting perspective for sure. I'm not trying to just deride the man. And if you want to read any of the other articles from today, all of them will be linked in the description below that like and subscribe button. But you know what else you can find down there? It is our daily delight. And I'm going to finish off today with this. It's a cute one. Make your day brighter and watch this bear make snow angels. Yes. You hear it right. The bear makes snow angels. Not really. It's more like a snow blob. Maybe it kind of looks like a snowman because he's kind of rolling around a little bit. His shoulders are prominent around there, but it's most definitely an interesting one. He's cute. He's adorable. He's a big guy too. So seeing those big animals that you could say look a little bit scary, they look intimidating, have a good time relaxing, that is something nice that we love to see. So if you want to check out that or any of the other articles, like I said, below the like and subscribe button in the description, that's where you can find all of them. Also down there, you can find the podcast on Spotify, Pocket Cast, Podvine, as well as the Twitter handle at your DailyFlip, where I post a Twitter tirade every Tuesday and Thursday. And if you come back here on Tuesday and Thursday, we have 6 and 6, which is 6 stories from around the world in 6 minutes or less. It's international news, RSS feed, YouTube channel, boom, boom, boom. All right, with all that said, there's only one more thing to say. Stay safe, don't die.